So how can state education agencies support local education agencies to determine the impact of their investments? Or if you're a member of a unitary system, how can you determine the impact of your school's investments? Well, let's learn from the current efforts of others. While the monitoring lever may seem like the obvious choice, we will argue that there are many levers that can be integrated to strengthen your approach. Looking across the national landscape, we see state education agencies taking varied approaches. But it's essential to move beyond monitoring the pace of spending. And so we offer this formula to help to determine the actual outcomes and the investments that you're making. In addition to monitoring spending, consider the student outcomes, the specific investments made in the intervention, so that if the intervention is effective, we can communicate, scale, and make informed sustainability decisions.
So SEAs can help LEAs track the pace of their ESSER spending through their monitoring authority, for instance, by publishing a public dashboard on their website, and we'll see an example of this on the next slide, sending regular reports to LEAs, tracking drawdown of funds, and collecting data from LEAs, for instance, to support the submission of the SEA's ESSER annual performance report. So on this slide here, you can see an example from Washington State and their spending dashboard. You'll notice that Washington State tracks LEA funds claimed and remaining and breaks out the ARP local 20% set aside for learning acceleration. This is their statewide dashboard, but each district has a page showing similar information. The second part of our formula is tracking student outcomes. SEAs might use their monitoring authority to, for instance, look at disaggregated LEA outcomes over time, particularly to identify groups of students that are in need of learning acceleration. To prepare data reports, for instance, to identify districts that have shown the most or least improvement. And finally, SEAs can use data they collect from districts to track students eligible for interventions that are not yet receiving support. Here's another dashboard, this one from the Ohio Department of Education, and it shows trends in enrollment, proficiency, chronic absenteeism, graduation, and K-3 diagnostics. Each district has its own profile tracking these trends, and you can check it out on the link in the chat. SEAs are also using visualizations to track both spending and outcomes. This is an internal tool that our partner Engenomics Lab created for New York, showing the percent of ARP spent versus proficiency above in ELA and math for tested grades. The size and the color of the circle you see here indicates this district serves a comparatively large number of students, and over 75% are economically disadvantaged. Based on displacement, we can see that it has spent slightly less than 20% of its ESSER funds, and that student proficiency for tested grades in ELA and math is slightly greater than 20%. In comparison, this other district is smaller and has fewer economically disadvantaged students. And based on its placement, this district has spent approximately 45% of their ESSER funds, and students are scoring about 85% proficient and above in combined ELA and math.
As we get curious about particular schools or school systems, the next step to determining impact is to use the levers of monitoring technical assistance to understand and evaluate the intervention. Whether it is you, a member of another department on your team, or an empowered partner, we need to deeply understand the intent, document the logic models, and assess the implementation of specific interventions. We all know context matters, so understanding how high-dosage tutoring or summer programs are working, not just in one, but several different contexts, will help to inform decisions that we need to make. The Puerto Rico Department of Education is using such a logic model tool to clarify the implementation and monitoring components of their Programa Re, which is their extended day program. There's increasing clarity about what the inputs, activities, and outputs are, and how these activities are to lead to outcomes. On the right-hand side of this logic model, you notice that there are 3 columns of outcomes: short-term, mid-term, and long-term. While many of the interventions being used by our schools are anticipated to have long-term effect and will really reflect the student outcomes and performance data and academic standards, we also need to focus on documenting the short-term and mid-term outcomes now. These are the leading indicators of impact. While you might use this type of tool with a school or agency you support, you can also use it for your own programs and initiatives. California, for example, is asking its own internal grant programs to document their theories of action. They have worked with the National Center, the Regional Comprehensive Center number 15, and Rel West to support their internal capacity building to understand and to communicate the impact they desire of their own grants. Once we fully understand the implementation of the intervention and its impact, we can make important decisions to communicate, scale, and sustain efforts. State teams can spotlight school-based efforts. You can also identify a North Star to set and hold a direction for statewide efforts, at times inserting it explicitly into policy and or creating targeted technical assistance and grant opportunities to scale.